Hello, welcome to this video and to this module. In this module, we'll talk about closures. You all might have known what closures are in JavaScript, but I'm here to tell you something more than you know about closures. You might already be familiar with closures, and in the next video, we are going to talk about how JavaScript references closures in its memory, and this part is what I told might be something new. And if you already know how closures are being referred inside of its memory, this module might not be much of an interest to you. But I highly encourage you to go through this module. In this video, we'll see what closures are, and then in the next video, as I said, we shall see how JavaScript references closures in its memory. We all know lexical scoping and how inner functions can access variables from its enclosed functions. Here in this code, let me remove inner for a while. Let me remove the return inner. In this code, we have myString inside of the outer function, and inside of the inner function we are console logging the variable myString, and when we console log myString we get JavaScript on the screen. This myString, there's no variable myString inside of the inner function, and this myString is being accessed from the outer function, and where myString is assigned the value of JavaScript. This is the lexical scoping and action. Here inner function can access variables from its enclosed functions. Here the enclosed function is the outer function. We also know that for each scoping, namespaces are allotted. Here for the outer function, the namespace is allotted, and for the inner function as a separate scope, namespace is allotted for this inner function as well. Just to make sure we all know what namespacing is, let me tell you what namespacing is. Namespacing, simply put, is a collection of names. In JavaScript, you can imagine a namespace as a mapping of every name you have defined to corresponding objects. Different namespaces can coexist at a given time but are completely isolated. The namespacing inside of the outer function is completely different from the namespacing inside of the inner function. A namespace containing all the built-in names is created when we start JavaScript and exists as long we don't exit. This is the reason why built-in functions like toString, toFixed, etc. are always available to us from any part of the program. Different namespaces are isolated, hence the same name that may exist in different scoping do not collide. Now let us look at a small example where closures are taking place. Let me open the developer tools, and I already have a file named closures inside of the snippet. And okay, let me remove this code. Okay, inside of closures.js I'm going to write exactly the same code that we saw in here. Let me, okay, this one, let me put the inner statement back. Okay, return inner. We're going to write down the exact same code inside of the closures.js file. Here I'm defining a variable, defining a function outer, and inside of the outer function I am assigning the value of JavaScript to the variable myString JavaScript. Now inside of the outer function I am defining another function. I am naming it inner, and inside of the inner function I am console logging the variable myString, and now outside of the inner function I am returning the inner function. Now in the global scope I am declaring a variable result, and I am assigning it outer call, that is outer function, and once the outer function is called, the inner function is being executed when we call the result function. Here when I assign outer function to the result variable with these two parentheses, we are calling the outer function, and when we call the outer function we go inside of the outer function, and inside of the outer function we are assigning myString inside of the variable environment the value of JavaScript. And now after the variable is assigned to myString, we go down, and when this function is not being executed because this function is not being called, so we return inner, and we are returning inner to the variable result, and result now as the value of this one, the highlighted portion. And when I call result with the two parentheses, this function is being executed, and when this function executes, we get the output JavaScript on the screen. Let me run the code, and we can see that the output is JavaScript. Now when we return the inner function, this one, when we return the inner function, the variable inside of the outer function, myString, is no longer referenced. And remember how garbage collector destroys variables that has no references. Then how is inner function able to access the variable myString? We are returning the inner function, and as our knowledge from the first module, we know that myString is not being referenced, and garbage collector destroys this, because when we return the inner function, we are only accessing this portion, and myString is not inside of the inner function. myString is inside of the outer function, but we are not returning this, we are not returning the entire portion, and myString should be destroyed. But we are able to access myString, and this is happening because of the magic of double square bracket scope property, which is hidden inside of JavaScript. JavaScript has a hidden property, double square bracket scope, and what it does is it closes the variables enclosed within the inner function, that is the variables inside of the outer function. This portion, the scope property, is going to enclose every variables inside of the outer function, that is the enclosed portion, enclosed function of the inner function. This is called closures. Suppose if we had a variable of number, let me write it down. Suppose we have a variable of mynum and has a value of 10. mynum is also being enclosed, that is, this mynum is also being enclosed by the hidden property scope. Let me remove this. Now this part is known as the closure. Let me put a debugger statement at line 11, and let me execute the code. When I execute the code, I enter the debugger mode. Let me step down the code. We enter the outer function, and inside of the outer function, we are assigning the value of JavaScript to myString. We can see that inside of the local scope, that is the variable environment, we have myString with the value of JavaScript. Now we are returning the inner function. When we return the inner function, we come to the global scope, and we are executing the result function, and when we execute the result function, this inner function is being executed. We enter inside of the inner function, and we are console logging myString. Observe in the scope that we have, observe in the scope section, that is this portion, we have something called closure, and inside of the closure we have myString JavaScript. This is being done by the double square bracket scope, and this is how we are able to console log myString, and we are getting the output as JavaScript. This is closure. This whole region is closure. This entire portion is closure. A closure is an inner function, that is, this function has access to the outer enclosing functions variable. Outer is the enclosing function, and the variables are being accessed by the inner function, even though when we return the inner function. Just to reiterate what closure is. A closure is an inner function that has access to the outer enclosing functions variable. This is no new to you, but what I think might be new to you is how it's saved inside of the memory, and we shall see how in the next video. See you in a bit.